The second stage of the negotiation process is opening, and it's the opening that creates the joint basis for the negotiation. It settles some of the key things that both parties need to know before they can confidently move into the bargaining stage. In this video, we'll look at the 7 things you need to cover in the opening stage of your negotiations. There are 7 things you need to make sure get covered during the opening stage of your negotiations, and I'm going to present them in the order that I think is ideal. That's not to say it's always going to be the right order for your circumstances, nor that you're always going to be able to cover these 7 things in that precise order. But there is a lot of sense in the sequence I give, which I'll try to hint at as we go through the 7 things. Number 1 is to make a strong and positive first impression. My father always said you only get one chance to make a first impression. And if you're negotiating with partners or parties with whom you've not negotiated before, you need to get that first impression right. And that's about how you carry yourself as you meet them. It's about how you enter the room. It's about how you look, how you act. It's your body language. It's about your preparedness for negotiation. If you sit down and you pull out of an old rucksack a scruffy bundle of papers and a chewed biro and you dump them on the desk, then that will create an impression. And it will be a very different impression to the one if you have a smart bag and you pull out of it a neat folder and a smart notebook and a nice pen. It doesn't have to be an expensive pen. It just has to be something that looks well looked after. If you're dressed appropriately for the circumstances, then that will make a very different impression to the impression you'll make if you've turned up without giving due thought to your appearance. This is also about observing the proper cultural rituals and traditions of a negotiation, which will be different for one person and for another person, depending on where you work and the kind of organisation you work in and the prevailing cultural background of the country you're in. But for many business circumstances, this includes looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand firmly. If you're able to do all of that, then as a minimum, the other party will think, here is someone who is well prepared and able to negotiate effectively. And that's all you want. You don't really want to make a first impression that says anything other than that, because chances are that will say that this is someone who is not well prepared or who I'm not comfortable doing business with. The second thing to cover is building rapport, because negotiation is an interaction between human beings. It may be a one-to-one negotiation or it may be a many-to-many negotiation, but the people in the room need to get to know one another. And this means taking some time for a little bit of light relationship building. If you're in control in any way of the negotiation process, then allow time to get refreshments, to chat, to introduce yourselves. That way, it's much harder for the parties to be rude, disrespectful, or to try to take advantage of one another when they know each other as people. Building rapport will also give you a sense of how the other people in the room operate, so that you will be better able to read the signals from their body language, from the tone of voice, when it comes to the negotiation proper, the bargaining stage. Once you've started to build a rapport, the next thing to do is to use that as the basis to check the authority that the other party has to enter into an agreement or to proceed towards an agreement. What you don't want to do is to make an assumption that if you make an agreement with the person sitting across the table to you, that agreement will stick. because there are many examples I could cite where you think you've made an agreement and then the other person turns around and says, I'm just going to have to check that with my boss, which of course is opening the door for their boss to come back and say, nope, don't like it, I need another concession. And by that time, you are becoming desperate and are more likely to make the concession. If you know at the outset the level of authority that the person you're dealing with has, then you can calibrate the concessions and the things you ask for from them accordingly. If they have absolute authority, then you can negotiate with confidence. If they don't have that authority, then you always have to be mindful that someone is sitting behind them with an agenda that you may not be aware of. Once you know the authority the other person has, you can agree the basis for the meeting. Is this meeting about forming a final agreement or moving towards the agreement? Are you working on the whole scope of the negotiation or a narrow component of it? And what is the process you're going to be using for coming to decision? And that leads me to a discussion about admin and ground rules. How are you going to operate within the meeting room? Are some things allowed? Are some things not allowed? What are the timings? What's the process for requesting a timeout or for stepping away or taking a break? How are notes going to be recorded? Is one person going to record notes for both parties? Are each party going to record their own notes? How are you going to compare the notes you have with one another to make sure that what you think you've agreed and what they think they've agreed match? And an important part of this might be an agenda. What's the sequence of conversations you're going to have and the approximate timings that are going to go with that sequence of discussions? Now we're ready for items 6 and 7. And I'm going to present these in the order that you should usually try to cover them off in. So at number 6, you want to try to get a sense of their outcome. What is it they're hoping to achieve? What for them marks a good deal? Ideally, you want them to put their position on the table. And you want them to do that before you put your position, your outcome on the table. Because if their outcome is more favourable to you than you had expected in your planning process, then you may want to revise the outcome you present them with to be more assertive. So 6 is to get their outcome and 7 is to offer your outcome. Put your position on the table. However, this is going to be tricky because they will be thinking exactly the same. They will want to get your outcome before they give you theirs. So there may be some jockeying for position. You may have pragmatically to accept that you put your outcome on the table first. Often there's an expectation that it is the seller who will go first in putting their position to the meeting. Now, there won't always be a party that is notionally the seller, but if there is, then the expectation is that they will have some form of schedule of rates or price list, even if it's not published. So if you're in that position, you may have to concede that ground. If the other party is the seller, then you have every right to expect that they will state their outcome, their price, their conditions, their terms at the outset. Why, therefore, would you ever want to put your position before hearing the other party's position? Well, the answer is if your position is likely to surprise them, it is likely to be more extreme than they're expecting. Either as a buyer, you want something for a price that is lower than you know is their standard rate, or as a seller, if you're going to be asking for a price that is higher than the buyer might expect. And the reason for this is because of the anchoring effect. If you start a negotiation based on the expectation, the statement of a standard expected set of rates, set of numbers, set of conditions and terms, then the whole negotiation is about how are we going to move in one direction or another from that point. And that point is sometimes known as the anchor. If, therefore, you need to cast an anchor that is going to be surprising to the other party, best to do it as soon as possible, because then the discussion is about how to move away from that anchor. And if that anchor is a long way from their expectation, then you're better moving away from the anchor than you are from their expectation, because every piece of movement is going to be difficult, and therefore you are more likely to get a result that is closer to the anchor. Also, it means that if the other party hears your position and thinks there is no way I can get anywhere near that, you can save yourself a lot of time negotiating if an agreement isn't going to be possible. So there you have it, 7 things you need to cover in the opening stage of a negotiation. Make sure you cover them all, and ideally try to cover them in a sequence that is as close as possible to the one I've set out. And you'll be ready to move to the bargaining stage with confidence. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.